Celebrating the results of the Naruto Top 99 Character Popularity Poll, this is Naruto Gaiden, The Whirl Within the Spiral, the prequel of a hero. A special one-shot written and drawn by the original creator of Naruto, Masashi Kishimoto himself. We open up to see a young, battle-damaged Minato on the front lines of the Third Great Shinobi War. Ahead of him were two insanely powerful enemies, the Jinchuriki of Son Goku, the Four Tails, Roshi, and the Jinchuriki of Kokuo, the Five Tails, Han. They were both charging up tail beast bombs aimed at Minato and company. According to Roshi, if the Hidden Leaf planned on fighting them on even footing, they should have brought the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. Recognizing the threat ahead of them, Master Jiraiya decided it was time for them to retreat and called on Minato to do the honors. Minato swiftly agreed. The two young Jinchuriki of the Hidden Stone Village continued to prepare their attacks. Then they launched them simultaneously. As the massive balls of chakra raced towards them, Jiraiya did what little he could to shield his squad. Meanwhile, Minato made use of the Flying Thunder God technique. Then there was a flash of light. All landing together several miles away, the four-man cell could see the enormous fallout of the blast they had barely managed to avoid. Dekai, one of the members of Minato's squad, who seemed to have had his appearance retconned, was in total disbelief and wondered if he was dead and this was the afterlife. Minato's black-haired squad mate, who, despite having the same general look, unfortunately doesn't have his name provided, would tell his friend to relax. They had been teleported and managed to escape thanks to Minato's Flying Thunder God technique. Still sweating from the ordeal, Jiraiya expressed how close of a call that really was. With one of his Markunai in front of him, Minato considered just how powerful the tailed beasts were. And thinking to himself, he also considered how one of them was inside Kushina. The thought alone seemed to have a major impact on him. Elsewhere, Kurama was speaking to his new vessel Kushina telepathically. He would speak of fear and resentment, and the fact that despite being out there in the world unlike himself, in reality, she was even more caged than he was. The words of the demon fox struck Kushina's wavering heart. He promised to set her free, provided she approached him and accepted his proposition. With a jolt, Kushina abruptly awoke from her slumber. Like his one-tailed sibling Shukaku, Kurama had been tormenting his host while they slept. But looking at the portrait of the Nine-Tailed Jinchuriki before her, the late wife of the first Hokage, Mito Uzumaki, Kushina convinced herself it was all just a reoccurring dream. But it wasn't the only reoccurrence. The scenery outside of her window remained the same as always. And looking about, the same two Anbu guards, as always, were with her too. One of the guards questioned what her schedule for the day entailed. Kushina replied that she was to participate in sealing technique training with Minato and wondered if the two weren't already aware of that. Taking a look to her right, Kushina noticed a butterfly perched to the side of a window. She wasted no time opening the window and freeing the beautiful creature, allowing it to enjoy the greater expanse of the village in ways that were no longer available to her. One of the Anbu members instructed her not to leave the barrier under any circumstance. It was the same line as always too. She agreed and did so with her signature "Yano" that her son Naruto would later inherit. Kushina wondered to herself when she and Minato would be able to be alone together. When she saw him though, Minato's expression wasn't especially enthusiastic. Undeterred, Kushina proclaimed that she wouldn't be holding back. Excited, she knew that Minato learned pretty quickly. But even so, there was still plenty more sealing techniques that the Uzumaki clan specialized in. But before she could finish her statement, Minato interrupted with an apology. Kushina was confused. Minato admitted that he wanted to go ahead and train for a different technique in a different location today. And that's what he had come to tell her. Kushina began her interrogation, asking him what kind of technique he was referring to. Minato was hesitant to tell her and began stumbling over his words. Kushina was not pleased at all. As an academy-aged Might Guy and Kakashi greeted a young Obito, Kushina asked where this different place was. That, however, was not hard for Minato to reply to. He would be headed to the third training grounds. Kushina was peeved. This supposed technique was one that he couldn't even tell her about? Minato was still stumbling. He corrected her by saying that it's because his technique is still incomplete and dangerous. Really, he just doesn't want her to get hurt. Hearing these words, Kushina came to her own understanding as her long red hair began to rise on its own. Totally flaring now, Kushina explained that if Minato didn't want to be with her, he could just say so plainly. But again, a flustered Minato tried to convince her otherwise. Just then, a familiar voice called out to him. The young couple turned their attention to see what was going on. Dekai and his other teammate were there to tell him that Lord Third had summoned them for the mission report and that he shouldn't make Team 6 wait too long. At the same time, 3 Konoichi groupies were gathering as well, hoping to spend some quality time with the handsome genius too. Minato, realizing the importance of his duty, knew that he had to go. Again, he would apologize to Kushina and promise to see her next time. Kushina tried to get a word out before he left, but before she could pursue him, one of the Anbu guards grabbed hold of her shoulder and told her to stop. As a young Kurenai and Asuma passed by, Kushina was left to see Minato's back turned to her as he approached everyone else. Kushina's expression grew sad. One more step, and she would be outside the barrier. Deflated, Kushina slowly returned to her usual enclosure and slid the window closed once more. Solemn, she remembered the words of her predecessor. They had both migrated to the Hidden Leaf Village to be vessels for the Ninetales, but before that, the vessel must find love and be filled with it. Lady Mito was sure that by doing that, although Kushina would be living as a Jinchuriki of the Ninetales, she would be able to find happiness. This was a scene present in the original Naruto manga, but now it is being expanded. A chubby little Kushina considered Lady Mito's words for a moment. Then she questioned her use of the word love. Lady Mito confirmed the notion, but admitted that it's not something Kushina will be able to achieve just by waiting around. Kushina looked up at the elderly woman with wonderment and uncertainty. Rising from her bed, Lady Mito urged the young girl to follow behind her. They were leaving the room. When they did, the 2 guards tending to Lady Mito were unsettled to see the elder out of her bed. But Mito insisted that she had something to show the young girl. Something that wouldn't take very long to do. Now in the present, Kushina called forth her signature chakra chains. Her usual Anbu guards cried out in shock. Restrained and fixed to the ground, they recognized this to be Kushina's sealing technique. They needed to free themselves quickly so they would be able to chase after her. But no matter what they did, they couldn't seem to take the chains off. One would think to themselves that with each passing year, Kushina's proficiency and the power of her bindings had grown stronger, to the point where she could now keep 2 seasoned shinobi for an extended period of time with no means of escape. Kushina raced through the streets of the village. Eventually, she made it to the barrier she was forbidden from crossing. Breathing heavily, she paused in front of it for a good while. Looking down, she was hesitant to take the plunge. Eventually, to steel her resolve, she closed her eyes tightly. Then she did it. She had moved beyond it. In this moment, Kushina's eyes opened to the possibilities of her newfound freedom, even if it was only just a brief stunt. And likewise, the same feeling of opportunity was relished by Kurama, whose pupil now replaced her own. According to him, everyone from the Uzumaki clan had become overly confident in using the sealing power of the Vortex. But ultimately, it's a power that can be used and a power that uses. At this very moment, he was sure that Kushina was drowning and bound in the flow of the Vortex. Bound in the flow of the times. Kurama, meanwhile, was bound by a far more primitive sort of sealing technique and in a far more complete state than he would eventually be for her son Naruto after being split. Speaking within their shared mindscape, he claimed to be the only one who could release her from the people who made her like this. The people that forced her into a foreign land turned her into a monster and kept her chained at their leisure. He told her that she mustn't forget her hatred, that she should never trust anyone other than him. Despite her fear of the towering creature, Kushina simply covered her altered eye and rushed towards the 3rd training area. And training there, Minato was wheezing from fatigue. Several spiral pattern craters were all around Master Jiraiya and himself. Perfect Sage spoke about how it was either Minato couldn't manage to do the move at all, or it suddenly discharged. This technique of his was quite unstable. Planted on the ground, Minato admitted that it was very difficult to control. Grabbing hold of Minato's head, Jiraiya would say that back in the day, when it came to needing chakra, he had heard that a person was supposed to match it with the direction of their hair whorl. He figured that might be worth considering here, but Minato questioned if that wasn't just superstition. But that wasn't entirely true. Matching up with how his own hair whorl swirls to the right, Jiraiya always needs chakra in the image of rotating to the right. This is the same sort of instruction he'd end up giving Naruto many years later. In Naruto's case, his hair whorl went to the right too. Minato trusted his master's judgment, and with that, he wondered what direction his hair went in. Jiraiya's expression changed then. Minato wondered what was wrong. Apparently, Minato has 2 hair whorls. One of them swirls to the right, and the other swirls to the left, which is an actual thing and a possibility that was never acknowledged in the original series. Minato could not believe his ears. Stunned, he questioned which direction he should need his chakra in. But unfortunately for him, Master Jiraiya wasn't really sure. Having hit a wall, the Toad Sage suggested that they take a short break. With him, Jiraiya had a pair of popsicles, the same ones he would so commonly share with Naruto later on. Splitting them apart, he asked Minato which popsicle he preferred. Minato was confused for a moment, but claimed that either was fine. They were the same after all. Just then, Minato came to a sudden realization. Connecting this to his training, he came to some conclusion based on the fact that regardless of the direction, they were the same. Just then, he leapt back up from his seat. Confused himself, Jiraiya wondered if the boy didn't want one after all. In that case, he'd just eat both of them himself, which was exactly what Minato had in mind. He realized that the opposing swirls could be needed in the same direction. By the time Kirby Sage finished his treat, he was able to witness an even greater one. Thinking to himself, he had heard that people with two-hair whirls were geniuses. But Minato's sensibility for ninjutsu was even beyond that. Finally, the young shinobi had done it. He had completed the construction of the rotating chakra spear. Now, all that was left was to name it. And in typical Minato fashion, he gave it the most ridiculous, uncool, and long name possible. This kind of detracted from the moment for Master Jiraiya, who concluded that in the naming department, Minato was anything but a genius. Minato didn't seem to be self-aware in that regard at all. But in the end, he had completed the first stage of creating his new technique. With that done, Jiraiya would take his leave to go apply for another mission. Minato acknowledged his master's departure as he dismissed the jutsu. Then, while taking something out of his bag, he noticed some rustling from behind a nearby tree and was surprised to see who it was. He wondered what Kushina was doing here and questioned if it was alright for her to do so. The red-hot habanero admitted that it wasn't entirely fine. Scratching her head, she tried to come up with an excuse. She lied and said that Lord Third allowed her to go beyond the barrier with special permission. Minato, bright-eyed and gullible, believed her without any hesitation and even rationalized this to be the reason why she didn't have any guards with her. But before that conversation point could go on any longer, Kushina opted to change the subject. Bowing deeply, she apologized for her behavior earlier, and she was sorry that she yelled at him. Minato was stunned. Then he was ashamed of himself. He felt like he was the one who should be sorry. He did break his promise to her after all. Kushina mentioned the technique he was working on earlier and wondered if that was the one he wanted to train. That's when Minato realized that Kushina had been watching for a while. To have successfully hidden her presence from both Minato and Jiraiya is actually really impressive. Minato's not exactly a sensory ninja or anything, but later on in life, he is no slouch in that department either. He paused for a moment. As they both sat down, he explained the truth to her. The reason he had broken his promise was for the sake of mastering that technique as quickly as he could. Kushina nodded and awaited the rest of what he had to say. The reason Minato was in such a rush was because he had created the technique for the sake of protecting her. Kushina was confused. She asked Minato what he meant. Still looking down, Minato expressed that because the village was currently at war, there may come a time where they'd put Kushina herself on the battlefield. Ultimately, for the sake of countering the power of the other-tailed beasts, Kushina was the village's trump card for Jinchuriki warfare. With that in mind, Minato wanted to create a technique that could work well with her incredible chakra as a Jinchuriki. He had made it for the sake of gifting it to Kushina. With a gentle yet somewhat pained smile on his face, Minato finally admitted that it was because he didn't want to lose her. Those words struck Kushina's heart. And in that moment of emotional vulnerability, Kurama seized his opportunity. Kushina began retching in pain and resistance. Concerned, Minato held her and asked what was wrong. And it didn't take long for his question to be answered on its own. The primordial chakra was spilling out of Kushina. In the next moment, Kushina sprouted her first tail and shunted the yellow flash with a slash across the chest, sending him back a considerable distance. Within her mindscape, Kushina cried out for Minato. As the seals restraining him began to be torn away, Kurama reminded Kushina of his previous words, that she shouldn't trust anyone, and that one day, this boy would use her too. Now, all he needed her to do was unseal him completely. And if she could do that, then she'd be freed from all her suffering. Kushina turned around in horror. Impatient, Kurama shouted that if she doesn't, then he'll just pierce her to death. But just then, to block one of his titanic tails was an even larger sealing technique, one whose source Kurama was unsure of. Out in the real world, Minato was holding Kushina and forcing his hand onto her stomach, telling her to get a hold of herself. He was extending his chakra to her. Thinking in his own head, Kurama acknowledged that despite not belonging to the Uzumaki clan, this brat was successfully enhancing the 4-symbol seal with his own technique. Furthermore, he recognized Minato to be a shinobi of the same caliber as the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju. He could not believe that there were others like him still around. Now, mind you, Hashirama lived long enough to see his granddaughter in the form of Tsunade. For Kurama himself to compare a teenager to the likes of the so-called god of shinobi is nothing to scoff at. Speaking through his vessel, who had now sprouted 3 chakra tails, Kurama questioned why a shinobi like Minato wanted to be involved with Kushina. Minato explained that it was because he liked strong people, especially people who are stronger than him. Having withstood all the self-sacrificing pain and loneliness she has, and still be able to smile so brightly while kicking ass when she needs to, Minato was certain of Kushina's strength. Holding her closer now, and with conviction in his eyes, Minato made it clear that this was why he loves Kushina, and also why he couldn't bear to lose her. Minato's words brought her to tears. From there, we would see the continuation of the flashback from earlier. Lady Mito explained that with the Uzumaki clan being as scattered as it is now, they had lost everything. They were a clan that was renowned the world over for possessing shinobi who attuned to the swirling currents of the natural world. They excelled in not only life force, but also sealing techniques. Their incredible gifts had been used on countless battlefields, and it had drowned them. It was as if their existence had been sealed in the Vortex itself. But even still, their power could bring balance. The symbol of their clan that was both on this house and floor was meant to strengthen the sealing power of Jinchuriki. They could also match it with a person outside on account of it being double layered. Uncertain, Kushina asked her elder if she could really manage to tame the Ninetales. Holding Kushina close, Lady Mito expressed that in her eyes, the girl was already a strong child, and a child with even more admirable red hair than her own. As the elder's hand rested on her head, Kushina looked down for a moment. She questioned if this was what Lady Mito had wanted to show her. However, the older Uzumaki would correct her. What she wanted her young successor to see was above them. Kushina looked up then. It was a vortex staircase. Again, the old Jinchuriki would correct her. It wasn't a vortex, it was a spiral staircase. From there, she'd urge the child to follow her up to the top. Kushina wondered what Lady Mito meant by the word spiral. According to Lady Mito, a whirlpool is always flat. It was like an unchanged picture, but a spiral, meanwhile, is 3-dimensional. Even if a spiral appears to be spinning in the same direction, the floor changes ever so slightly, and along with that, the scenery changes as well. The two continued to ascend. Excited now, Kushina even began to take the lead. She wondered with awe what might be at the top. Gently smiling, Lady Mito said that it was the one that was inside the vessel in her. Finally, they had made it to the top. Kushina had a huge smile on her face now as she recognized what was ahead of them. Taking a seat then, Lady Mito told Kushina that when times are hard, she always comes here just to gaze at the scenery at the top. Kushina asked if what was in front of her was the one that was inside Lady Mito's vessel, and if she wasn't mistaken, she knew the man's relationship to the elder. Lady Mito confirmed Kushina's thoughts. Opening her eyes, she also confirmed that it was true that they may be inside the vortex. But even still, if the girl tries to climb it by herself, she should be able to find love. And if she does that, then surely the vortex would turn into a spiral. Together, they observed the Hokage monument, specifically that of Lady Mito's late husband, Hashirama. From here on out, she hoped that Kushina would be able to see a different scenery from this one. And in far better spirits now, the fiery-headed girl would agree. In the present, Kushina still had her eyes closed. Then she suddenly opened them with a renewed intensity and drive. Rapidly projecting them from her body, Kushina released a surging bombardment of sealing chains towards the demon fox. This impressive display was quick to completely envelop Kurama's form. She had them completely cover him as he recoiled from the force. With her hair and voice raised, Kushina exclaimed that she could still defy the beast. Infuriated, Kurama began to call for his tail beast bomb while shouting the name of his young host. At that moment, Minato noticed the shift. Kushina's eyes and expression in the physical world had stabilized. Now on their knees, Minato was happy to see that she had come to her senses. Seeing him, Kushina called out to Minato. While his words shook, he'd tell Kushina that they would take care of this together, the two of them. Now Kurama was really pissed. The massive ball of chakra quickly approached its apex as he tugged on the chains. Now relieving himself of the strain, Kurama flung the chains about, which were of course connected to Kushina's body, and did the same thing to her. Because she was being overwhelmed within her mindscape, Kushina's chakra cloak transformation reached a whole new level. Now, she had a total of 7 tails. And with that, Kurama used her clawed hand to impale Minato. But even with her hand through his body, Minato never took his off of hers. This is insane! Master Jiraiya himself was pushed to a similar point by Naruto as a child, and that was only with 4 tails being active. This is worse than Naruto vs Orochimaru on Tenchi Bridge. Even Pain was severely pushed back by Naruto's 6-tailed form. Granted, you could argue that Naruto was a much stronger vessel by then, and despite having this many tails, Kushina doesn't seem to have the skeletal exterior that Naruto possessed at 6. But it is still very impressive. At this point, Kushina was quite literally drowning inside the vortex. Knowing how much she had hurt the boy she loves, Kushina, with tears in her eyes, would tell Minato to stop and just run away already. But even with such a potentially mortal wound, Minato refused to leave her. Continuing, he vowed to never leave her. Kushina couldn't even muster the words to respond. Through her, Kurama demanded that Minato release his stealing hand. Kushina was his Jinchuriki. As far as he was concerned, this boy had nothing to do with their situation. But Minato refused. The 9 tails was wrong. He could feel it. Kushina came to a major realization. Again, she recalled the words of the late Lady Mito, that they came to the Hidden Leaf Village to be vessels for the 9-tailed fox. But before then, such a vessel must both find and be filled with love. By doing so, despite their fate as Jinchuriki, they could still find happiness. Kushina's eyes were wide at what she saw. Above, coalescing a mighty ball of swirling power from his hand, was the chakra-made vestige of Minato. Here, he proclaimed himself to always be within Kushina. This is similar to how Sasuke was able to enter the shared mindscape of Naruto and Kurama near the beginning of Part 2. Kushina formed the Ram Hand Seal. The chains around Kurama became more tightly wound around his neck. Minato made his final descent towards the Titaness Canopy. With a feat the likes of which are difficult to fathom at such a stage, Minato's new jutsu collided with the ancient power of the mightiest tailed beast Bijou Bomb. He refused to ever hand Kushina over to the beast. In a flash, Kurama was bewildered. Kushina braced herself as witness, and Minato remained undeterred. Sometime later, a bandaged Minato woke up inside the Konoha hospital. Surrounding his bed were the likes of Kushina, Lady Tsunade, and Master Jiraiya. Tsunade's presence here is a bit peculiar, considering she developed her fear of blood during the previous Great Shinobi War, but I suppose that, like we saw from one of the Shippuden filler episodes, she could still provide analysis and instruction to other medical professionals. With him now awake, Kushina hugged Minato very tightly. He even recoiled from the pain, but even still, Kushina would not let him go. Minato processed her feelings for a moment before smiling gratefully. The chronically single legends of the previous generation smiled at the young and happy couple. It was now a new day, and the two were inside the Uzumaki Tower. Kushina was excited to know that they could finally start training again. From there, she brought up the subject of the jutsu Minato used before. According to her, it looked a whole lot like the chakra sphere that the Nine Tails was going to use. She wondered how he developed such a thing. Minato expressed that on the battlefield, he saw the chakra sphere of 2 Jinchuriki up close and used them as references, which is some freak of nature genius shinobi behavior, I might add. He would express his desire to entrust the technique to her so she would be able to encounter those other Jinchuriki in the field. And from there, he shared the absurdly complicated name he had for it, Kushina was quick to tell him how lame and ridiculously long the name was. And just like before, Minato clearly lacked awareness on that front. The funny thing is that although Naruto didn't inherit this exact issue, mostly on account of never really creating any jutsu, besides a sexy transformation, he does have the similar problem of being unable to explain how any jutsu work. He mostly defaults to sound effects and other bits of nonsense. But at the very least, Minato did come up with one good name in his life, even if it was just a reference to a character from his master's novel, Naruto. But seeing as Minato had crafted the jutsu as a gift for her, Kushina decided that she would be the one to name it. Minato didn't have a problem with that, but was still hesitant. But before then, Kushina wanted him to follow her for a bit. She knew just the place to help her come up with it. We would find ourselves presented by the very same Uzumaki clan symbol on the ground. Then there was the spiral staircase. Once at the top, Minato was all too excited to have such an incredible view of the village he so loved. Kushina was awestruck. The same sort of butterfly as the one she had previously released was approaching the gentle hand of the boy she loves. Kushina decided to name the spiraling sphere jutsu Rasengan. At first, Minato wasn't sure what she was talking about. She reminded him of their reason for coming to the top and wondered what he thought. Then she blushed warmly. Just like Lady Mito had hoped, Kushina was able to see a different scenery from the one before. Minato's head was now positioned next to the statued visage of Lord Thirds, like it would eventually be when he becomes Hokage. As the butterfly landed atop his hair, Minato gave her the warmest smile in the world as he repeated the name of the technique that would eventually be possessed by their child, Rasengan. Yeah, it's a good name. Naruto is my absolute favorite shonen series of all time. Between Kishimoto returning to personally draw this chapter himself and the sheer brilliance of his writing and symbolism, I couldn't be any happier with this perfect chapter. In the comments, let us know what you think about this incredible one-shot. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.